Hello, my name's Eddie Miller and I've been asked to tell you a little bit about my hobby, which is wood carving. And I started wood carving in 1975 when, as a young mum with a 2-year-old son, I felt the need to get out of the house. Remember how that feels? Well, I joined a wood carving class in Rothwell near Kettering, run by a self-taught wood carver called Alan Duncan. He held classes above the co-op and I would go there once a week in the evening. Now, to do any kind of wood carving you need gouges, and the gouges I started with were maybe 2 or 3 of different sizes and shapes. The first one would be the V-shape gouge. If you can see it there, it has a V shape and is ideal for the first type of cutting out that you'll do around the edges of your wood carving. The other would be a deeper gouge. They're all very similar in length, but they have different gauges in width and depth. So this is a quite shallow one and it's beveled on the other side. So it's sharpened in a figure 8 type on an oil stone or on a wheel. I started with 2 or 3, but Alan Duncan had many other tools and we could borrow those. The other thing that you need, of course, is a mallet to hit the chisel, and then you have to learn how to handle it and move it along the wood. So some of the things that you might need if you were thinking of starting to carve is a bench or a work surface of any kind. I have a bench here, but I started off with this very small bench which you could actually just trap things into and carve from there. You need a good light, and I've got an angle lamp in here when it works. Because you need a well lit area. Some of the inspiration comes from books or magazines, and I have a beginner's guide to wood carving, but the carving magazine was very useful. There's carving and there's chip and chats, which are very good, and I have gathered many of those over the years. Some of my carvings have come from them, though not many. I first started carving in 1975, and the first piece I did, apart from some bits and pieces, was a carving of horse pulling a plough, and that came from a Country Life magazine. And here we have the carving itself, and that's from beech. It's quite a hard wood, and I had to carve round with the Beast tool that I showed you around the outside, put the picture in pencil on the wood, and then cut out the background and shape the horses. Following that, you use a sandpaper and Abranex to clean the carving. This is a Abranex, which is quite good and quite reusable, and they come in different grades. And then you polish it. You can polish it with a varnish, or you can use a brie wax. I favour brie wax now, but in the early days we used to use varnish. So that was that. Very crude but quite effective at a distance. Continuing that theme, the next one was the farmer leading the horses out, and you can see there that was a front page of Country Life, and so I use that as my template, and that's a piece of teak that I used, and I was experimenting with lots of different woods that you can use, and trying to get a little bit better as well. I think the horses there perhaps are slightly better than the ones in the other first carving. In between times I would gather roots from the woods when we were walking, and sometimes some sticks. So we were quite into sticks, and this was a piece of beech that are polished, and it just lends itself, doesn't it, to a walking stick, putting a stopper on that end. We used to use it to push my 3-year-old son by then on his tricycle. We would call it the pushing stick, and give him a hand up the hill, or when he stopped, as they do. This one is an older one. That was 1975 as well, which has got a bit of woodworm in it now, but it doesn't matter. It still serves, and it's still quite strong. It was wildlife and birds that I started to carve, and for that you needed to choose the right kind of wood, and I started to use different hardwoods. Some were fruit woods, and others, like this, was a piece of teak that you could pencil on a drawing of the bird or figure that you wanted, and then bandsaw rough it out and then carve it. One such was the figure here in teak, which is meant to be a scarecrow. It was one of my failures. It never really got off the ground, and I didn't finish it. So it sits here, waiting to be carved. It could be, but probably won't be. Other woods that I've used are yew, and this is a lovely piece of yew. Can you see the red centre of it, which polishes up beautifully, and the shape there that would lend itself to a bird's head here with the tail going down. That would be bandsawed out, and I'd enjoy doing that. That piece of yew came from Lord Abbey when they took some of the yew trees down, so I will carve that. Another piece of wood is sycamore. I've not carved it yet, but I'm going to experiment with this piece that one of my wood carving colleagues gave me to try out. And that's got a nice shape, and you wait to find a piece that you'd like to do that would fit that shape. Now we'll go inside and show you some of the birds that I carved in the 80s. So now we've come inside just to have a look at some of the birds that were created from bits of wood like I've just shown you. And this is one of the robin, who is of yew and was done in the 80s. Not a perfect piece by any means, but over the years things happen to them, especially when people are dusting very vigorously. So this one had to have his beak replaced because he fell off the perch. Yeah. And this one is a chaffinch. Now this chaffinch had his beak is integral, so and the feathering, as you can see, has to be put in with different types of gouges to make lines in the wood, and try and shape the feathers and get the eyes. From there, always inspired by wildlife, I did some otters, and this is one that has survived again since the 80s, and that's a view.
He's got a lovely face.
They lend themselves, don't they, in their stance. This one is lime, which is a nice soft wood, and it's a light wood, and I like that, and it came ever so easy because it was such a simple shape and very effective, and not too much carving, but you can see what it is very quickly.
It could be a lion cub.
Yes, it could, couldn't it? Yeah.
Or a cat. Member of the cat family.
It's a member of the cat family. And then I started to look at figures and doing things in relief. Figures are not very easy because you've got hands and you've got faces with noses and eyes, and you've got to get them in the right place. But this one was the second attempt at a gaffer, and the gaffer is the old golfer. I enjoyed doing 2 of these. One was a chap that asked me to carve him a golfer, which I did, and sold it to him at a modest price, and liked it so much myself I carved this one afterwards. I think this one was better in the end. But
has he got a caddy?
He's got a caddy. There's his caddy there, and he's sitting on a piece of yew. He will come off. You can use a peg in the bottom of his feet to help to stand. It's actually displaying them is quite important, that they're displayed quite right. And that came from the carving magazine. So I had a template, and he's out of sweet chestnut. Often times in your life it's inspiration comes from different places, and obviously I've been a Christian for all my life, really, since I was 13, and so was inspired by different aspects of church life. And this one was again in the 80s, when my son was confirmed and he was receiving communion from the church warden at the time. This is a very poor carving in carving terms, but it meant something to me.
So that's the church warden handing the chalice to your son.
Yeah. And like all church wardens, they're worth their weight in gold, and he was no exception. And I'd start off with a photograph and then go from there. Then I was on retreat one day and saw this carving done by a nun, and this isn't a complete replica, but I was so taken with it at the time. I came home and decided to do one myself.
What's that sort of wood is that?
I think that's likely to be sweet chestnut as well, because it's got a bit of a grain that you can see in it. Again, these are in the 80s, so they're getting quite old now. And then this one, which you can probably tell what this one is. It's the figure of Christ, the Sermon on the Mount. Again, very crudely done. I had to practice doing faces and hands. The hands on this are actually inserted afterwards because they're so very difficult to get. And he's sitting on a rock, and this came from a vicarage gatepost, and so it's in oak. So very nice gateposts, these vicarages, and when it was taken down, I used the top of it for this, so very apt. And to hold it in a vice, you have to put a hole in the bottom of it, and then you can actually fix it to a vice there to be worked on. And that's the 80s phase. I'll tell you a little bit about the 2000 phase, because I took a break then and was nursing for many years, and it wasn't until I retired that I started wood carving again. When I living in Peterborough, went to look for a carver and found Glyn Mould, who carves at Sacrowell Farm and Elton Village Hall, and I joined his class about 12 years ago probably, and go there. So we come now to perhaps it's the last phase of wood carving, when I restarted after retirement. And went to Glyn Mould in Sacrowell Farm and Elton Village Hall, where he did some classes, and he belongs to the Carvers Association. The first thing I needed to do was get back into it, because it'd been many years since I'd done any carving really, and so I did a plaque for the house, and the house was called West Home, or is called West Home, and there are lots of owls nearby, so an owl seemed quite fitting flying over the fens. So that was West Home. Words are done in relief bubble type lettering, which is easier than cutting into the wood, and it had to be varnished with acetylene because it's going outside the house onto the wall. So it's got a lead piece around to keep it weatherproofed, and it hangs on the wall just outside the bungalow.
Where did you actually get the idea of a flying owl from?
You find a picture that actually suits the piece of wood and what's in your mind's eye, really. And I needed an owl fly across the fence and found one in a magazine.
Thank you.
So 2 other plaques that I have done was when the grandchildren were small, and this one is of my first grandson, who's now 7, but his name is Liam, and that was inspired by a photograph of him toddling with his daddy, and I wanted to produce that in sweet chestnut, and that's now given to him to put on his shelf in his bedroom. The first letter, the L, no, it's not that. Sorry, there you go. First letter is a photograph of him walking with his daddy.
And then did you do another one for your second grandson?
Yes.
Dylan.
That's right, Dylan. And of course it's more of a family one there because you've got Dylan driving the train and Dylan with a football. Over there he's dancing. And then this one was Daddy hanging on to both the boys, and that came from this photograph here. Of course there's one letter more, so that took a whole lot longer.
How long did it take?
Probably over a year.
And you've got Mummy Angela with him there.
Yes, lifting him up. Sometimes you have a piece of wood which is rather larger than the smaller things I've shown you up to now. This owl was carved from a piece of walnut that I'd had in the garage for many years. And as you see, when you're doing a larger piece, you need a larger tool for it. And this wouldn't fit under a bandsaw, so it was all carved by hand. This is the chisel that I used, which is quite a deep gouge and could take off the waste wood much quicker. The feathering is very crudely done, but as you see, what you do is you draw onto the piece of wood where you want your feathers to be, and then using your V-tool that I showed you previously, you cut in and around your pencil lines, and then because feathers actually overlap each other, you have to get an undercut. So that takes some time, but it's quite rewarding on a larger piece. This sits in the garden quite nicely.
Oh, you've got a baby there.
Yes, it had a little hollow there, and we just felt it needed something. And she's looking down at the baby. So, hello again. So in 2012, Liz and I went to the Holy Land and did a pilgrimage there. And as I was saying, often where you have been or what you've seen inspires the next piece of wood carving, as it did at this time. And we were at the well in Samaria, and we went down into the crypt area of the church there, and there was an iconographer, and he was painting the icon of Andrei Rublev's Trinity, where Abraham, the 3 angels appeared to Abraham, and he gave a hospitality. And this inspired me to see what would it be like to carve such an icon in prayer and including prayer as I did it. So this piece is in lime. It was done on a large piece of lime and had to be drawn on from the picture of the icon. The centre part carved separately, and then the two other angels put in on top so that we could get that. I suppose you could have done it in a board type, and you see them, don't you, with boards coming out at the side. You could have done it like that, but this was easier to do as a picture, and then it was framed. And it came very naturally and easily. I was amazed, actually, and it was a lovely thing to do, to pray while you're working. So this inspired another look at some of the stories in the Bible, and one of them was the prodigal son, and I had a card sent to me with the prodigal, picture of the prodigal, and so I thought that would be, what would that be like to carve? And this is in sweet chestnut, and it speaks to me of the coming home and the welcoming that God gives all of us when we make mistakes. So that inspired that, and it's used brie wax to polish it. So sweet chestnut with a brie wax finish. Finish is quite important in all the carvings, and spending a lot of time sanding and cleaning out some of the chisel marks in the creases. It's not an easy thing to do. You have to be quite patient, but I hope I'm inspiring some budding carvers to have a go with something simple. It's quite rewarding and very tactile. So continuing on the theme, in 2013 I started my lay pastoral ministry training. One of the modules that we were doing was on salvation history, and the brief was that we could produce something that described salvation history, either written or in any other craft form. And I thought, what a wonderful opportunity. And so my tutor, Glyn Mould at wood carving, was very helpful here, and often is. I'm not an original thinker, but we discussed what salvation history meant to me, and we produced this diagram here of what we could do to present as my assignment. So this was a picture that we drew, and he said you could do a quick carving because it needed to be done in a timely fashion on a piece of MDF, which is some board which has got a veneer of wood. And so we transferred that picture onto this piece of wood, and using a V chisel, which I'll demonstrate now if I can, having marked it out, using a V chisel and not coming off the wood at all, you tap it round all the way without lifting the chisel if you can, because each time you lift you leave a little mark in the wood because it's only millimetre depth. So that was how that was done, and then polished to bring up what you can see of salvation history. Well, you perhaps can't see it terribly well. When that was presented to the tutor, they were quite taken with that. They hadn't had something carved as the assignment, but it made me think, how could I do that better in relief given more time? And so I then produced this other piece here, again in sweet chestnut, because it's a nice wood to use. It's not too hard and it's got a nice grain. And so salvation history to me meant God's creation of the world and the sun and the moon. So we've got the moon, the sun rays coming down. but also that Jesus came down from to the world, was crucified and raised by God, which is the hands, up to heaven, and taking away what I saw as the sins of the world were the crown of thorns on his head, and of course the dove of peace. So that was my piece. And one of my colleagues at wood carving, Ralph, he's a great carpenter, and he managed to put that in a frame for me.
Waiting.
I hope we're keeping everybody amused here with these videos. So this is our trip to Oregon, where my aunt lives, and we spent a lovely holiday there. And of course Americans like wood carving as well, and a lot of the magazines come from America. This was a piece of myrtle that we found in a wood store, and so we carved a heron from the myrtle because of the shape it was in. So you've got his head feathers and a nice long beak, and he's holding an eel. And if you see, we just had to use the shape of the wood, and on that side it was quite flat, and as we come round we can see a different view of the heron there. The other thing we found when we were visiting wood carving places in Oregon was that they use very different woods to ours. This is mounted on a maple burr, and the maple burr is like a cancerous thing on the maple tree that they cut off, and they sold me that for $25 and made a lovely base for the heron to sit on. So that's the heron with the maple burr.
And then you came home to do some of our wildlife with the hares.
Yeah.
Which one did you do first?
So the one in yew was the piece of yew that I had, and as you see, it had to have his ears quite differently to most caricatures of a hare, and he's of yew. As you see from the shine on them, there's such a beautiful grain, and it polishes up lovely. Really enjoyed doing that one.
He's a comical one.
Yeah, but then you said I'd like something a little more traditional, like the moon gazing hare. And this was probably one of the last things I've done, and was quite a challenge, but I'm hoping that I'm improving. So you've got the mother hare there, which was the first one I'd done. Both of these are from sweet chestnut.
And you've got the lettering.
The lettering was a challenge. I'd never done lettering like that before, and I had to do a lot of practicing, because once you do it on your base, on your beautiful piece of wood, you don't want to make any mistakes. And so Glyn and I worked on that, and I'll show you a piece I worked on. So folks, we're back in the garage where my workbench is, and this is where I had to practice doing the lettering that you saw around the moon gazing hare. And my tutor said you have to write out your lettering, making careful spacing between them, because they look very different once they're done, and then using very straight chisel, cut into the center line. We're giving one bang like that, and then to take out the waist coming sideways, again one bang, and you don't want to put too many bangs there. And to get the serifs on the top, use a slightly curved chisel, going away like that, and then just using the very edge of the chisel to take out that and flick that out, and you can just see the serif appearing there, and then turning it the other way, just for the very edge of the chisel goes in there, give it a little tap and ping that out, a little ping. You don't want to go over it too many times, otherwise you end up with a deeper and deeper cut, which is what you don't want. So I had to practice that. It's the first time I've done that kind of lettering, so I was very pleased with the result.
You had to make sure that the piece of wood didn't move.
Yes, very important. So on this, it needed the clamp there. So lots of different ways of holding your wood, but it is important too.
You also did some lettering on the bench that you made.
Yes, I don't think you can see that terribly well in here. It's not gone out into the garden yet, has it?
Stay home, Liz and Eddie, 2020.
That was a piece of ash.
That was a lockdown piece.
That was a lockdown, yeah.
With our little heads over the stay home. Well, thank you, Eddie, for showing us your woodwork skills.
Well, thank you all for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed that video, and I'll see you soon. Bye.